I never thought that that would happen, but I am actually playing in a Spelljammer game right now, using GURPS. Personally, I have never delved deep into the Spelljammer material, so I only had a surface level knowledge of the setting. Now I am familiarizing myself more with the setting, so let's convert some of the Spelljammer races to GURPS. Let's start with a GIF, large humanoid hippos that love guns and explosives. The GIF are 8 to 9 feet tall, so they have size modifier +1 and +1 bonus to basic move. They are strong and tough. I decided to give them a racial bonus of +5 to strength, +1 to HT, and 4 extra hit points. The GIF aren't particularly bright, so I gave them a -1 penalty to IQ and compensated the secondary characteristics decrease by a +1 bonus to will and perception. Their skin is tough, so I gave them DR1 with tough skin. The hippos have their eyes on the sides of their heads, so I gave the GIF peripheral vision. Finally, the GIF are herbivores, so I gave them restricted diet herbivore. Despite that, they have fangs and 2 levels of born biter. As you can see, this is a quite simple racial template, but still is quite an expensive one. I would also suggest adding Code of Honor soldiers to the template, as it seems very appropriate. The next race on the list is much more interesting, the insectare. They are a very secretive spacefaring race of humanoid insects that look very similar to elves. Sure, they have lime green skin and a pair of antennae, but nothing that cannot be concealed under heavy clothing and a hood. While they despise elves, they aren't on very friendly terms with other races either. To the non-insectare, they seem cold and emotionless, but among their kin, they are much more open. The thing is that they use their antennae to communicate emotions. What I like about them is that they are mysterious and creepy. Nobody really knows where they came from and what their goals are. The insectare are always in the background. Nobody really knows why they are so similar to elves. Is this a disguise or some sort of mimicry? Are they similar creatures that imitate other races? If you do not mind fan-made material, I highly recommend a blog post by Old Dragon that describes Clickrow, the secretive patron deity of the insectare, in great detail. The post also expands on the insectare lore, giving you more insight into their history and society. I linked it in the description, there's some very good stuff. Now for the racial template. I have to mention that I'm using the D&D 3.5 version of the insectare from Dragon Magazine 339, and there are some quite significant differences between that version and the original AD&D one. First of all, the insectare are thin and agile. I went with a +1 to dexterity, -1 hit point, and a racial skinny disadvantage. Their eyes are adapted to underground life and are multifaceted. That's infravision and the polarization detection perk from GURPS Power's enhanced senses. They are insects with an exoskeleton. This is cold-blooded and DR1. They are talented manipulators, so I went with the racial smooth operator talent. However, they will also have callows. Finally, the antennae. I decided to represent them with a telescent advantage. It is limited with a magical power modifier, the vague limitation that only lets one communicate emotions and not complex thoughts. The antennae can be attacked and disabled, so I added the nuisance effect. Finally, I limited it to work only on the other insectare. You might have noticed that this limitation value is -40%, while telescent canonically has the racial limitation that is worth -20%. However, the racial limitation allows the advantage to work not only on the members of your race, but also on members of similar races. In a traditional fantasy setting, that would include most of other humanoid races, so I went with a harsher limitation here. That's pretty much it for the insectare. I think such disadvantages as intolerance elves and sense of duty insectare would be very common among this race, and maybe even appropriate for the inclusion on the racial template. Now, if you'd like to make it more accurate to the AD&D version, you would have to increase the DR from 1 to around 6 or even higher, as the exoskeleton was said to be as tough as plate armor. The antennae in AD&D used to be 8 feet long and usable as whips. I would use a natural weapon advantage from Pyramid 365 and give the insectare something like what you can see on the screen right now. It's a complex write-up. Next up, we have something much less interesting, the scro. Basically, they are orcs, but bigger, stronger and smarter. Unlike the savage orcs, the scro are cunning tacticians who live in a militaristic, regimented society. I think they are much closer to hobgoblins than orcs in that regard. In one of my earlier videos, I talked about how to represent the D&D orcs in GURPS to make them less boring, and most of the points still apply here. I went with the racial strength +2 bonus for an average scro, but many of them will have size modifier +1 and higher ST. I give them extra thick skulls to make one of the vulnerable hit locations much less vulnerable. Infravision is required to be able to see in the dark. Rapid healing and reduced consumption 1 with cast iron stomach makes military logistics much easier for the scro. Striking strength lets them wield larger and heavier weapons and deal more damage. Finally, I gave them a racial negative appearance. They are ugly after all. Next up, we have the hadozee. These humanoid apes are excellent crewmates that work on spelljammers and normal ships of other races. While you may know them from Stormwrack for D&D 3.5, the hadozee originate in the spelljammer setting. Their main shtick is the patagial flaps that allow them to glide through the air. This is an unusual form of movement that very few other races have access to. In GURPS, this is flight with a gliding limitation. They also have certain features that are not represented in D&D mechanically, but that can be represented in GURPS. First of all, their feet have opposable thumbs and are as agile as their hands. This is extra arms with the foot manipulator's limitation. Usually I give temporary disadvantage ham-fisted 2 to ape-like creatures with foot manipulators, but in this case I decided to omit it. The book clearly says, fully dexterous. Perfect balance also seems very appropriate for a deck-bound ape. Many often forget that the brachiator advantage even exists, but here it would work perfectly, allowing the hadozee to brachiate on the ship's rigging. While the hadozee are omnivores, they have vicious fangs. Finally, they have the fur perk. In terms of mentality, the main hadozee thing is that they are very hardworking, not to the point of being workaholic, but they always do their job properly. I think this may justify the racial code of honor professional disadvantage. In the end, we get a quite expensive racial template with some unique features, but not too expensive for a player character. For now, that's it, but there are many more races in the Spelljammer setting that range from bland to really interesting, and if you'd like to see more of them, feel free to tell me. Thank you for watching, I will see you next time.